Before I even open my mouth about what happened, I need to explain the way that whole trip started, because honestly, the strangeness didn't just begin with the boots. It already felt like the kind of week where everything was slightly tilted, like a phone screen that's cracked just enough to bother you, but not enough to replace. I had been trying to get out of town for days, and every time I packed, unpacked, repacked, I kept feeling like I was forgetting something. By the time I finally got on the road, I just wanted quiet. Nothing dramatic. No big adventure. Just a break. The campground I picked wasn't the usual one I went to. The others were full, and this one showed up on a random search, tucked between two tiny towns I had never heard of. The photos looked average, which was perfect. The reviews were mixed, but mixed in the way that told me the place was probably fine. Some people complain if a tree looks at them weird, so I didn't think much of it. I got there late, right before sunset, and everything looked normal enough. A little run down, but that's honestly most campgrounds if you don't pay $50 a night to camp beside people who bring espresso machines. The guy in the sight two spots over waved at me without looking long, like he waved at every car, so nothing felt weird about that. I set up my tent fast since daylight was fading. I threw my boots inside the tent right by the flap like always, because the ground was still soft from rain earlier, and waking up to wet boots ruins an entire day. That night was quiet, almost too quiet, but I didn't think about it then. My brain wasn't in horror mode or paranoia mode. I was just tired. I ate something simple, messed around on my phone until the battery dipped low, then turned it off so I could use it as an alarm. I crawled into my sleeping bag and knocked out instantly. When I woke up, it wasn't to a sound, just a feeling. Not fear exactly, more like that moment when you wake up in a place that isn't your bedroom and your brain needs a second to catch up. I blinked, waited for the fog to clear, and then sat up. My breath made a kind of white wisp in front of me. The temperature had dropped more than I expected. I reached toward the tent flap automatically, hand patting the floor for my boots. Nothing. I thought I had missed them and leaned farther. Again, nothing. I leaned so far I nearly face planted. The boots weren't in the tent at all. There was this weird few seconds where I was still half asleep and trying to come up with the most boring explanation. Maybe I kicked them while I slept. Maybe they rolled out when I opened the tent earlier, except I hadn't opened it. The zipper was still closed all the way down. I unzipped it slowly, not because I was scared yet, but because everything felt slower than usual, like the air resisted being moved. The boots were outside the tent, lined up perfectly. Not just tossed or dropped, but placed, toes pointing directly toward the tent, laces tucked inside as if someone didn't want them dragging on the ground. I stared at them way too long, trying to make the sight match any version of reality that didn't involve someone else touching my stuff. I had been alone. The sites near me were empty when I pulled in. The closest person had been way down near the bathroom. No cars pulled in during the night. I would have heard engines or gravel or footsteps. I stepped out of the tent in my socks, the cold dirt biting through the fabric. The ground was mostly smooth. There were faint indentations around the boots, not deep enough to be footprints, but enough to tell something had been there. The soil looked brushed, almost cleaned up. I crouched down, touching the side of one boot. It felt warmer than everything else around it. Not warm like heated, just not cold the way something should be if it sat outside all night in mountain weather, like it hadn't been out there long. I looked around at the trees. Nothing moved. No birds. No rustling. Just stillness that felt way too concentrated. I tried to tell myself this had a normal explanation. I tried so hard. Like maybe I did leave them out and just forgot. Maybe I was more exhausted than I realized. But the zipper being closed felt like the thing my brain couldn't bend around. I kicked the boots lightly, just to see if anything fell out or if any bugs crawled out, but nothing did. I brushed off the bottoms and slipped them on because my socks were already dirty anyway. When I turned back toward my tent, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Little marks. Tiny lines in the dirt. They circled the tent in an uneven loop. Not animal tracks. Too long and straight. I followed them with my eyes. The marks went completely around the tent, looping again and again like someone paced in circles around where I slept. I didn't like that thought. I pushed it away so hard it felt physical. I forced myself to do normal morning stuff, because normal routines usually reset my brain. I pulled food from the cooler, boiled water, made something like breakfast. The campsite still felt dead quiet. Too quiet. I checked my phone, but the battery was 50% lower than it should have been for being off all night. No missed calls. No messages. Nothing. When I reached into my backpack for a jacket, everything inside looked wrong. Not empty or taken. Just rearranged. Less messy. Like someone who didn't know me tried to make it neat. My charger wasn't tangled anymore. My notebook wasn't buried at the bottom where I left it, and the notebook was open. I never left it open. I grabbed it. The last thing I remembered writing in it was some dumb list of groceries before the trip. Now the page was covered in tallies, lines grouped in fives, and next to each group a time, handwritten, not by me. The time started before sunset the night before and ended early that morning. I didn't want to decide what that meant. I closed the notebook and shoved it deep into the bag. I walked to the creek near the site just to get some space for my own stuff. Water usually calms me. The creek ran shallow, trickling over stones, but the mud near the edge had a single visible footprint. Same size as mine, but wrong tread. I know my boot pattern. This wasn't it. The footprint pointed toward the creek, but no print pointed back. I backed up slowly, trying not to step on it like that mattered. Something about seeing it alone like that made my brain itch. On my way back to the site, I froze again. Not from fear, but from pure confusion. Sticks were pushed into the dirt around my tent, evenly spaced, 5 or 6 feet apart. Small thin sticks, like someone picked specific ones and planted them into the ground like markers. They weren't there last night, I would noticed. They formed a rough wide ring around my tent, not perfect, but intentional. I pulled one out. The dirt around it was loose. It had been placed recently. The campsite felt smaller suddenly, like the trees leaned closer, like everything was paying attention. I decided right then I was leaving. I began packing, trying to do it fast, but not so fast that I messed things up. Stuffing clothes, rolling the sleeping bag, collapsing the tent. And while I packed, I noticed details I had missed earlier. My cooler had a smudge on it, the kind of smudge from being moved. My car keys were in a different pocket of my bag than where I left them. My water bottle was filled higher than before, which made no sense because I hadn't touched the creek water last night. When I lifted the tent to fold it, the dirt underneath was packed down in a pattern, like someone had crouched there several times. I didn't want to think about that either. I shoved everything into the car and did one last walk around the site to make sure I didn't leave trash, partly because I don't like leaving a mess, partly because I wanted to look at the boots again. I lifted one boot to examine the bottom. Something was stuck in the tread, a leaf. Not unusual. Except it wasn't from this area. It looked like a type of leaf I saw near the far trail, miles from where I camped. I hadn't gone hiking yet. I tossed it aside and climbed into the car. My hands shook when I started the engine, and I hated that. I didn't want to be scared. I wanted to be logical, but logic didn't have any foothold left in that campsite. As I drove toward the exit, I kept checking the rearview mirror without meaning to. Not expecting anything specific, just checking. The trees got thicker and thicker behind me until the site wasn't visible. I pushed my foot harder on the gas than I needed to. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station in the nearest town. I parked, got out, and walked around the car just to breathe normal air again. When I reached the trunk, I paused. That same leaf from the boot tread was sitting on top of my cooler. And the thing that bothers me the most isn't the boots, or the sticks, or the tally marks, or the rearranged backpack. It's that when I got home and finally unpacked, everything looked fine. Completely normal, like nothing had been weird. Except inside my notebook, where the tallies had been, the page was blank. Not erased, not torn out, just blank. Like no one had written anything at all. I did not plan the trip in a calm or thoughtful way. It was more like I woke up one morning already annoyed at everything and decided I needed to be somewhere with trees and no signal before I snapped at the wrong person. I threw stuff into my car without checking half of it, drove 3 hours north, and pulled into a campground I had never heard of before. It was one of those places that felt slightly forgotten, like the signs were old, but still standing, and the gravel road looked like it had not been smoothed out in years. That should have made me feel relaxed. Instead, it felt like I showed up late to something that had already started without me. The first weird thing happened before I even parked. A guy walking his dog waved at me and nodded like he knew me. That by itself was nothing. People do that all the time. But then another camper walking past the check-in board glanced over and smiled in a way that felt too specific. Not friendly exactly, more like recognition. I brushed it off and told myself I was being dramatic because I was tired and hungry. The permit board was one of those wooden ones with clear sleeves holding printed sheets. Names, sites, arrival dates, departure dates. I leaned out of my car to read it and almost skipped over my own name because my brain assumed it was coincidence. Then it hit me that it was actually there. My full name, spelled right, circled in pen. Next to it were dates that matched my plan exactly, even though I had booked the site online less than 12 hours earlier. I stood there longer than I should have, just staring. I checked the site number and it matched the one on my phone. I scrolled back through my confirmation email to make sure I had not somehow submitted personal notes or public info. Nothing, just standard booking. I looked around expecting someone to laugh or point or explain it, but nobody was paying attention to me. Everyone acted like this was normal. I told myself it had to be a system thing. Maybe the campground printed online reservations early. Maybe someone circled names for organization. Still, a circle felt deliberate. Thick ink, pressed hard, like whoever did it wanted it noticed. On the way to my site, 2 different people nodded at me again. One even raised their eyebrows like they were waiting to see something. Nobody spoke. I did not hear my name said out loud, but I felt it everywhere like static. My site was near the edge of the campground, backed up to a tree line that was dense enough to block most light once the sun dropped. The ground was flat and clean, fire pit centered perfectly, picnic table pushed slightly to the side like someone had already adjusted it. I parked, sat in the car for a minute, then got out and started setting up. I needed routine, tent poles, stakes, muscle memory. That was when I noticed the trash can nearby had a label taped to it with my name written in marker. Not printed, written. Same style as the circle on the board. I peeled the tape off and folded it into my pocket without really knowing why. By the time I finished setting up, the feeling that I was being watched had settled in fully. Not the dramatic horror movie kind, just a steady awareness that other people were aware of me too. Every time someone walked past, they glanced over, not staring, checking. I went for a short walk to calm down and notice something else. The path signs had small stickers on them. Dots, arrows, symbols that did not mean anything to me, but they all seemed to point back toward my site, no matter which direction I walked. When I reached a fork, both directions eventually looped me closer to where I started. I told myself it was coincidence and bad trail design. That night, I sat by my fire longer than planned because going into my tent felt wrong. People passed by even though it was late, more than usual. They slowed down near my site, adjusted their bags, checked their phones, then kept going. One person dropped something and picked it up right next to my cooler. They did not apologize or acknowledge me. They just moved on. When I finally crawled into my tent, I could not sleep. I kept replaying the board in my head. The circle. The dates. I pulled out my phone and checked the campground website again. No mention of public name displays. Nothing about highlighted permits. I searched the campground name with my own name just to see if anything came up. Nothing. Around midnight, I heard movement outside. Footsteps that stopped just short of my tent. Not pacing, just standing. I held my breath and waited. After a while, the steps moved away, slow and careful. The next morning, I went straight back to the permit board. My name was still circled, but now there were small marks next to it. Check marks. 3 of them. I checked the time. It was not even 8 yet. I had only arrived yesterday afternoon. I walked to the ranger station, but it was closed. Sign said it opened at 10. I waited in my car watching people come and go. A few looked over at me like they were counting. I noticed some of them had papers clipped to their backpacks. Same size as the permit sheets. When the station finally opened, I went inside and tried to explain what was going on without sounding unhinged. The ranger listened with a blank expression, then pulled up the reservation system. According to it, my booking had been in the system for weeks. Same site, same dates, same notes. Notes I did not write. Reminders about arrival time. Reminders about departure time. Reminders about behavior. I left without pushing it further because the way they looked at me changed when they scrolled, like they were seeing something they already knew about. Back at my site, my cooler was moved slightly. My chair was folded differently. Nothing stolen. Nothing damaged. just adjusted, like someone had checked it off a list. I spent the afternoon pretending everything was normal. I cooked. I walked. I sat. Every time I passed someone, I felt like I was behind on something, like I was late. I noticed more circles on the permit board now. Not just mine, but mine was the only one with dates written underneath in pen instead of print. That night, I decided to leave early in the morning. I packed what I could quietly. I slept in my clothes. When I woke up before sunrise, my car was parked a little differently than I remembered, still locked, nothing missing, but angled toward the exit. I walked back to the board one last time. My name had a line through it now, not crossed out, completed. I did not stop at the ranger station. I drove straight out. When I checked my phone later, my reservation showed as completed. Review requested. Stay confirmed. I'm not the type of person who believes every weird thing that happens is some deep sign or hidden message. But the whole reason I even went on that trip in the first place was because I needed to clear my head. I'd been dealing with too much noise from school, from my job, from everything at home, and I guess I convinced myself that disappearing into the woods would magically reset my brain. I'd done solo camping trips before, but never at a place this far out, and honestly that should have been the first clue that I was doing too much. When you're choosing a spot mainly because nobody else picks it, maybe that's not a great idea. But I wasn't thinking like a smart person. I just wanted space. The drive took almost 5 hours, and by the time I reached the entrance to the park, my legs were stiff and I felt gross from sitting so long. The gate was open, but there was no ranger booth, just a faded sign telling visitors to check in at a board near the day parking lot. The whole place looked like it had been built and then forgotten about. Tall pines swayed over the road, casting long strips of shadow across the gravel, and the deeper I drove, the more it felt like I had slipped into a place where time ran slower. That kind of sounds dramatic, but that's really how it felt. Like the world outside the trees was running on one clock and this place was running on another. The campground itself wasn't crowded at all. I only saw 2 cars when I pulled in, and they were parked near the front. My site was farther up, close to a trailhead that didn't seem very popular. That was perfect for me. I wanted quiet and no awkward small talk with strangers. I set up my tent, tossed my bag on the picnic table, and walked around to stretch my legs. Nothing felt strange yet. Nothing even felt off. If anything, I was finally starting to relax. I didn't see the man the first afternoon, or at least I don't think I did. It's weird to say that now, because part of me keeps replaying the whole thing, wondering if I glanced at him without realizing who he was. But at the time, everything felt normal. I cooked dinner, watched the sky turn orange behind the tree line, and went to bed early. It was quiet except for the bugs and the creek somewhere behind the site. Peaceful in a way I hadn't felt in months. The next morning, I woke up before the sun had fully pushed through the branches. I stepped outside and stretched, and that was when I saw him for the first time. He was on the trail near my site, walking in the same direction I was planning to go. He wasn't close enough to say anything and not far enough to ignore. Just there. Moving steadily, hands in his pockets, head slightly down like he was reading the ground. He didn't glance at me, didn't slow down, just walked past the opening to my site and disappeared around a bend. I didn't think anything of it. People hike early all the time. It actually made me feel better knowing someone else was on the trail. I made breakfast, packed a small bag, and headed out myself about 20 minutes later. The trail was narrow and curved a lot, weaving between trees and roots. I didn't see the guy again for almost an hour, not until I rounded a corner and spotted him ahead of me, moving at a steady pace. He didn't stop or look back. He didn't seem bothered that someone was behind him. I kept enough distance that I wasn't crowding him, and the whole situation felt normal enough that I didn't question it. But then it happened again. I took a break near a fallen log to drink water. I must have been sitting for 10 minutes, maybe longer. The guy had disappeared from sight by then, so I assumed he was far ahead. When I started walking again, I figured I wasn't going to see him for the rest of the hike. Yet somehow, 20 minutes later, he was right in front of me again. Same pace, same posture, same distance. As if he had never gone that far ahead at all. As if he had only been slightly around the curve waiting for me to catch up. That was the first time my brain hesitated. I tried telling myself there were probably shortcuts or side paths I didn't notice. Maybe he'd stopped somewhere and I didn't see him. The explanations felt thin, but I wasn't ready to label it strange yet. You don't want to make everything scary when you're hiking alone. That's how you ruin your own trip. I slowed down and eventually stopped again to let him move ahead. This time I sat for almost half an hour, long enough for my legs to cool down and start complaining. When I started walking again, I took my time. I even forced myself to take pictures of random trees to break the habit of moving fast. I didn't see him for almost an hour, then two, and finally I started to relax again. When I reached the loop at the back end of the trail, there was a clearing with a bench that overlooked a ridge. I decided to sit for a while. I wasn't tired exactly, but the quiet felt good. The kind of quiet that feels heavy but comforting. That's probably why it startled me so much when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around expecting to see a deer or a jogger. It was him. The same man. But he wasn't coming down the trail I had just walked. He was coming from the opposite side. The side I hadn't gone near. The side that didn't lead anywhere except a long, steep drop. There was no way he'd been behind me the entire time without me seeing him. And there was no way he had looped around the ridge quietly because the path was covered in dry leaves. He walked past me without acknowledging I was even there. I didn't move for a long time after that. My stomach felt weird, like someone had hooked it and pulled downward. I tried convincing myself I'd misjudged where he came from. Maybe the layout of the ridge was different than I thought. Maybe he'd taken a hidden switchback. But even as I tried to make excuses, none of them stuck in my head. I decided to turn back early. I didn't want to keep running into him, and I definitely didn't want him behind me on a narrow trail. So I waited until he was fully out of sight, and then headed back the way I came. For a long time, the hike back was uneventful. I kept checking over my shoulder because I couldn't stop myself. Nothing. No footsteps. No sign of him. When I finally got back to my site, I felt this huge wave of relief, the kind that almost feels like embarrassment because you realize how tense you were. That relief didn't last long. When I walked over to my picnic table, there was something sitting on it. At first I thought it was trash or a leaf that blew over, but when I got closer, I saw what it actually was. A folded piece of paper. My name was written on it. Not printed, not typed. Handwritten, slanted, sharp, like someone who wrote fast but pressed down too hard. I looked around, heart beating in this weird off rhythm I hated. The other campsites were empty. The trail entrance was quiet. Nothing felt right anymore. I opened the paper. Inside was a drawing, not a good one, but detailed enough to make my throat go dry. It was a sketch of the trail, my trail, and on it were two stick figures. One was me, clear from the hat I was wearing in the morning. The other was ahead of me, circled over and over and over. Underneath the drawing was a single sentence. You finally noticed. I don't remember deciding to pack up. It was like my hands acted before my brain. I shoved things into bags without folding them. I didn't eat. I didn't check the creek. I didn't even think about staying another night. I just tore down camp as fast as I could, tossed everything into the car, and got ready to leave. But right when I started the engine, someone walked out from behind the trees. Him. Not far away. Not close enough to grab me. Just close enough that I could see the expression on his face. He looked calm. Too calm. Like someone who wasn't surprised at all at how scared I was. I didn't wait to see what he'd do next. I backed out so fast the gravel spit everywhere and drove until my hands stopped shaking. When I reached the edge of the park, I looked into the rearview mirror. He was gone. But the worst part is this. When I got home and unpacked, I found the same folded paper inside my backpack. The same drawing, same sentence. Except the second sentence had been added under it. Next time you won't lose sight of me so easily.
Hey guys, really sorry to interrupt. If you're still listening, then you're enjoying the story so far. And if you are enjoying, then please hit that like button. That's all I ask of you. Thanks so much. Now back to the stories.
I want to explain something about the way I used to think. I never believed tech could actually creep me out. People freak out about their phones listening to them or their data being sold, and I always rolled my eyes because honestly nothing about my life is interesting enough for anyone to spy on. That was my attitude going into the camping trip. I was burnt out and annoyed at everything, but not paranoid. I wasn't expecting anything surprising or dramatic. I just wanted 2 nights where I didn't have to hear my name called from another room or reread messages for people asking for favors. I figured the woods would feel like a reset button. Turns out nature didn't scare me. What did scare me was something I thought I understood. A small, beat-up radio that should not have been doing anything except buzzing. I didn't bring it. It was already in the cabin. Yeah, I know I said camping trip, but technically it was one of those old cabins the park rents out. The kind with walls so thin you can hear the wind through them. I chose it because the campground had been booked out, and the ranger mentioned the cabin still had openings. It wasn't fancy at all. No power outlets except one in the corner. No working lights except a ceiling bulb that flickered. No Peter. And definitely no Wi-Fi or phone signal. But it beat driving back home after a 5-hour drive, so I took it. Inside the cabin, sitting on a dusty shelf near the window, was a little gray radio with a metal antenna bent sideways. It looked like something someone's grandpa used to bring on fishing trips. I didn't think much of it except to tap it out of curiosity. It made a soft static sound like it wanted to work but couldn't. I unpacked, made a quick dinner outside over the fire pit, walked around a bit, and came back in after sunset. I was exhausted, mentally more than physically, and I remember sitting on the cabin floor leaning against the bed frame, trying to relax. The static from the radio kept rising and fading, almost like breathing. It wasn't loud enough to be annoying, just this soft background noise that blended into everything else. I fell asleep fast. But sometime early in the morning, still dark outside, I woke up to the radio making a different sound. Not static. Not music. Not a weather report. It was a voice. Except not just any voice. It was mine. At first it didn't make sense. I sat up slowly, blinking hard, trying to decide if I was still dreaming. The voice coming from the radio was calm at first, repeating a sentence over and over. I didn't recognize it immediately because I wasn't fully awake, but then the words started connecting in my head. It was something I read out loud 2 nights before the trip. Something from an argument. Something I had said in my bedroom at home when I thought nobody was listening. I froze. Completely. A kind of frozen where your body refuses to even twitch because moving suddenly feels like the wrong decision. I didn't know what to do, so I just sat there listening. And the more the radio repeated it, the more I recognized it, not just the words, but the exact tone, the exact breath pattern, the exact frustration behind it. There is no way anyone recorded that. There is no way anyone else heard it. I had been alone in my room, talking too loud, pacing around, trying to calm down before packing my stuff for the trip. It was one of those arguments that sits in your head afterward and makes you feel dumb for saying too much. Hearing it inside a cabin miles away from home made my chest tighten like someone had taken the air out of the room. I finally forced myself to get up and walk toward the radio. The voice stopped right before I touched it, cutting into silence so harsh it made my ears ring. I turned the dial. Nothing. Just static again. I turned it off and unplugged it even though it didn't seem like it needed power. I sat awake until the sun came up. The next morning I told myself there had to be a logical reason. Old radios pick up weird signals, right? Maybe it was catching some random broadcast that just happened to match something I said in the past. Maybe my brain was filling in the blanks because I was half asleep. That explanation wasn't good, but it was the only one that didn't make me feel like I was losing it. I spent most of the day hiking to get it out of my mind. I stayed out for hours trying to focus on the sound of leaves and running water and whatever else the woods wanted to throw at me. And it actually helped. By the time I got back to the cabin in the late afternoon, the fear felt faded, like something from an old dream that didn't matter anymore. The radio was still unplugged exactly how I left it. I made dinner, cleaned up, and sat on a small wooden step outside the cabin as the sky turned dark. Everything felt normal. Calm, even. I think at that point I believed the situation was over. That it had been one weird glitch from a broken piece of hardware that wasn't worth freaking out about. But then, around midnight, the radio turned on again. Not the normal click, not the soft hum. Just an immediate crackle followed by a voice speaking clearly, my voice again. But this time, it wasn't repeating the same sentence. It was replaying a whole conversation. Not from that week, not even from that month. It was replaying an argument I had almost a year ago, one of the worst ones I'd ever had, the kind that sticks with you because you said things you didn't mean and read something that made everything worse. I hadn't thought about that night in months, but hearing it brought back everything I tried to forget. The most disturbing part wasn't hearing my voice. It was hearing the other half of the argument. A man's voice. Someone I used to talk to a lot but hadn't spoken to in months. The radio repeated some of the things he had said, things he never said over the phone, things he only said in person, in private. The realization hit me like a punch. The radio wasn't replaying a phone call. It was replaying something that happened inside my actual house. I backed away from it so fast I knocked into the bed frame. The voice kept going, looping tiny pieces, repeating certain sentences, almost like it was testing how far it could go. I stared at the unplugged cord lying limp on the ground. I grabbed my flashlight, went outside, shut the cabin door, and walked to my car because being inside the cabin felt impossible. I turned on the interior lights and sat in the driver's seat with my hands shaking against the steering wheel. I kept thinking someone was outside the cabin listening, or worse, inside it. I tried to rationalize it again because that's what your brain does when something doesn't make sense. You start coming up with explanations that sound awful, but at least familiar. Maybe someone planted a device. Maybe there was some hidden receiver. But none of it fit. There was no way anyone would go through all of that trouble just to replay my own arguments back at me. That's not a prank. That's not normal. I stayed in the car until the radio finally went silent again, which took almost an hour. I wanted to leave, but driving 5 hours in the dark while barely awake felt like a worse idea than staying until sunrise. So I stayed, but I didn't sleep. I didn't even blink for long. Every sound felt wrong. Every shadow felt too close. When the sun finally rose, I went back inside the cabin. The radio was on the floor now, lying on its side, like someone had knocked it over or kicked it. Except I hadn't been inside. There was a piece of paper next to it. Square. White. Blank except for a line written cleanly across the middle. It was a sentence I had spoken on the drive up. Not out loud. Just in my head. On the paper, written exactly in the phrasing I had silently thought to myself, were the words, "You always talk more when you think nobody can hear you." I didn't even gather my stuff properly. I threw everything into bags, dragged it to the car, slammed the trunk, and drove away so fast the gravel kicked up behind me. I didn't look back at the cabin. I didn't check the rear window. I didn't breathe normally until the park entrance was miles behind me. When I finally got home and unpacked everything, I realized something that made my stomach drop so hard it felt like I might pass out. My bag was missing one item. My old phone, the broken one I stopped using months ago. The one that still had recordings on it from arguments I never deleted. And that's when everything clicked in the worst possible way. Someone must have gotten access to that phone. Someone must have listened, saved things, moved things, and for whatever reason waited until I was completely isolated before showing me they had them. The next morning, a small package showed up at my doorstep with no return label. Inside was my old phone, wiped clean, not one file left on it. And at the bottom of the box under the phone was a tiny radio antenna, bet the same exact way as the one in the cabin. I'm not really the kind of person who goes digging around in places just because something looks weird. If I see a strange shape under a log or some random amount of dirt, I move on. Not because I'm scared, but because usually it's nothing. And honestly, if I hadn't been bored out of my mind that afternoon, I probably never would have found the notebook at all. Everything that happened after would have stayed buried under the dirt like it was supposed to. The whole trip happened because I needed a break from being around people. Everyone kept asking me for stuff, expecting things from me, and acting like I existed to solve whatever they didn't want to handle. I felt drained in a way I hadn't felt before, so when the weekend came up, I bolted. Grabbed some clothes, some food, my gear, and drove to this primitive campground way out past the lake. It wasn't one of the nice places with firewood for sale or a picnic area. This one barely had a real road leading to it. The campsites were rough circles of dirt surrounded by trees that looked older than anything I'd seen before. I picked the site farthest from the entrance because I wanted total quiet, and for the first day, I got exactly what I wanted. I set up my tent, built a fire, made some decent food, and sat back watching the sparks twist upward. Nothing weird. Nothing stressful. No one around to hear me breathing. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It felt earned. The next morning, though, things started to shift in a way I couldn't explain at first. It wasn't a loud thing or a dramatic thing. Just this weird little itch in the back of my mind telling me something about my site had been moved. I didn't know what it was, and at first I ignored it, thinking maybe I had just set things up wrong the night before. But the longer I stayed there, the more that feeling stuck to me, like something around me expected me to notice it. It wasn't until I went to collect fallen branches by the fire pit that I saw the patch of dirt that didn't match. Everything around the pit was dry and scattered with pine needles, but right beside it was this one round patch of softer dirt, almost like someone had scooped it out recently and filled it back in. Normally, I wouldn't care, but the circle was too perfect, too smooth, and the color of the soil underneath was darker than the top layer, like it hadn't been exposed to air long. I grabbed a stick and pushed it into the center just to see how deep it went. The stick sank halfway down with barely any resistance. That was enough to spike my curiosity. And yeah, I know how that sounds. But when something looks out of place in the middle of nowhere and you're alone with nothing but time, your brain latches onto it. I knelt down and started digging with my hands, pushing the dirt aside until something solid touched my fingers. It felt like a book at first, and I actually laughed a little under my breath because it seemed ridiculous. Why would someone bury a book? Who even does that? But after brushing some dirt off, that's exactly what it was. A notebook. Soft cover, black, edges worn like it had been handled a lot before someone put it underground. I sat back on my heels staring at it, half expecting it to crumble, but it didn't. The cover held. I opened it, flipping through the pages. Most of them were empty, but the first few had writing in them. Not neat writing. Not scribbles either. Something in between, like someone wrote fast and kept stopping to think. When I read the first line, I froze completely. It was my name. My full name. Written across the top of the page like a title. At first, I honestly thought someone was messing with me. Like maybe some friends found out where I was camping and decided to freak me out. But the notebook didn't feel like a prank. The writing was too serious, too steady, like whoever wrote it wasn't trying to scare anyone. They were documenting something. Under my name, there were dates. Not dates from the weekend. Dates from weeks before. Months before. Times when I had been walking home from work or grocery shopping or sitting alone in a park near my house. Next to each date was a short note. Saw her near the bridge. Stayed on the sidewalk today. Did not look over shoulder. Walked home slower than usual. Every entry was like that. Small. Observational. Like someone standing behind me taking notes about my routines. When I hit the middle of the notebook, things shifted. The entries turned into longer paragraphs. Some mentioned what I wore. Some mentioned the way I stood while waiting at crosswalks. Some mentioned things I thought not even people close to me noticed. Things I probably didn't notice about myself. There were no names. No explanations. No reason why someone was paying attention to me enough to document details like the way I cracked my knuckles or the fact that I always looked at my phone when crossing a certain street even when nobody texted me. The last entry made my hands go cold. He will be in the woods this weekend. That will be the best time. Best time for what? Why would someone bury that near my fire pit? Why did someone even know I'd be there? I shut the notebook and just sat staring at it like it might explain itself. My heart was beating too fast and my mind felt scattered, trying to put together every possible reason this could exist. None of them were good. None of them made sense. I stuffed the notebook into my backpack because leaving it out felt worse and stood up, suddenly convinced someone could be watching me from the trees. My brain kept darting around the idea that maybe the person who wrote it wasn't gone. Maybe they were waiting to see if I found it. I scanned the woods listening for anything, footsteps, branches shifting, someone breathing too close. But the woods were completely still. It wasn't comforting. It felt staged. I kept replaying the idea that someone had been following me long before this trip, that they had known where I lived, how I walked, what I did when I thought I was alone. The entries weren't guesses. They were precise. Observations from close range. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to stay. I didn't want to pack up in case someone was watching. I didn't want to turn my back on the trees. The silence around me felt thicker than before, like it was waiting. I forced myself to act normal, or at least pretend to. I walked around the site collecting random things, not because I needed them, but because I didn't want it to look like I was panicking. I took down the tarp slowly, trying not to look behind me too much. But every time I looked at the fire pit, I pictured someone kneeling there in the dark while I slept, burying a notebook with my name inside it. Eventually, I decided I couldn't stay. My nerves were shot and every sound made me jump. Even the birds felt wrong. I started packing, stuffing my tent and sleeping bag into the car as fast as I could without looking like I was sprinting. When I went back to grab my backpack, something caught my eye. The dirt beside the fire pit, the same spot I had dug into earlier. Except now, the soil was pressed down again, flattened perfectly like someone had smoothed it out with their hand. I hadn't done that. I had walked straight to the car. Nobody else should have been near it. My stomach dropped so hard it felt like the ground tilted. I didn't think. I grabbed my backpack, ran to the car, and got inside, locking the doors even though that does nothing in the woods. My hands shook the whole time I turned the key. The urge to look behind me was so strong it felt physical, but I refused. I drove out of the campground so fast the tires slid on the dirt road. I didn't stop until I reached an open area near the highway. I pulled over, heart still racing, and opened my backpack to check the notebook again. It wasn't there. My bag was empty except for my jacket. I sat there breathing too hard, staring into the backpack like the notebook might magically appear. It didn't. I checked the backseat, the trunk, the floor. Nothing. Either it fell out, or someone took it while I wasn't looking. Both of those choices made my chest tighten. When I got home later that night, there was something on my porch, a small stack of dirt, just a pile, sitting right in the center of the welcome mat. On top of it, half buried, was the notebook. The last page had a new line written inside it. You were supposed to leave it where it was. The first thing that felt off wasn't scary. It was small and stupid and easy to explain away, which is why it stuck with me. I woke up because my sleeping bag felt tighter than usual, like the ground had decided to slope overnight and gravity was slowly dragging me toward one corner of the tent. I remember thinking I must have rolled around in my sleep or kicked the wall or something. I unzipped the door and sat there blinking at the trees, still half asleep, still telling myself nothing weird was happening. Then I saw the stakes. I had set up the tent myself the night before. I am weirdly careful about that kind of thing. I measured the distance between stakes by arm span. I double-checked the angles. I pressed them deep because I hate when tents sag. That morning, the stakes were still there, but they weren't where they were supposed to be. They formed a loose ring around the tent, like someone had taken time to space them evenly. Not just my tent stakes either. Thin wooden stakes, lighter than mine, pushed into the dirt with little marks carved into the tops. Lines, numbers maybe. I didn't touch them. I just stared, trying to figure out if this was some campground thing I didn't know about. I stood up and stretched, and that's when I heard the voices. They were close, but not right next to me. Maybe 20 feet off, behind the brush where the trail curves. It sounded like two people, maybe three. They weren't whispering, just talking low, like they didn't expect anyone to hear. I wasn't trying to listen at first. I was just standing there, barefoot on cold dirt, waiting for my brain to fully turn on. Then I caught the part that made my stomach drop. They were talking about whether I would notice. They said it like it was a joke, like it was a debate that had been going on for a while. Whether I would notice if they moved my tent a few feet each night. Someone said the stakes helped keep track. Someone else said I was more observant than I looked. They weren't guessing who I was. They were talking about me specifically. About how long it would take before I said something or packed up or did something unpredictable. I didn't move. I don't know why. Fear maybe, but also confusion. Part of me thought I was still dreaming. Another part thought maybe this was some prank show or some weird social thing. I stayed frozen long enough for the voices to drift away, footsteps crunching slow and unbothered. When they were gone, I checked my phone. No signal, which wasn't surprising. It was why I came out here in the first place. I wanted a few days off grid, just me, my tent, and a cheap cooler full of food that would probably go bad by day 3. I had told a couple friends where I was going, but not exactly where my site was. I didn't think I needed to. I spent that day trying to act normal. I made instant oatmeal. I walked the trail down to the creek. I sat on a rock and scrolled through old photos even though nothing would load. Every time I came back to the tent, I checked the stakes. They didn't move during the day. Everything stayed perfectly still, like whatever happened only happened when I wasn't looking. That night, I barely slept. Every sound felt louder than it should have been. Leaves scraping, something moving far away, my own breathing. At some point I did sleep because I remember dreaming about dragging my tent across a parking lot while people watched and took notes. I woke up to the sound of voices again. This time they were closer. They were standing somewhere behind the tent, not even trying to hide it. I could see shadows through the thin fabric. They talked about measurements, about alignment, about how the ground here made it easier because the slope hid the shift. One of them said tonight should be the biggest move yet, just to see if I reacted. I stayed still. I kept my eyes closed. I focused on breathing slow and even, pretending I was still asleep. My heart felt like it was trying to crawl out of my chest, but I didn't move. Eventually, the voices faded again, like they had accomplished whatever they came to do. When I finally opened the tent, the world looked the same. Same trees, same sky, same dirt, but the angle was wrong. The creek that had been straight ahead yesterday was now off to the left. My cooler sat at a slightly different distance from the door. Nothing dramatic, nothing you could point at and prove. Just enough to make me feel like I was losing track of reality. I tried to retrace my steps from the day before. I walked to the creek and back, counting steps. It didn't line up. I checked the stakes again. More marks had been added, deeper this time. I thought about leaving. I really did, but there was this stubborn part of me that didn't want to let whoever this was win. I didn't want to be the person who panicked and ran because of something that could still have a normal explanation. Maybe it was some research thing. Maybe it was a messed up orientation exercise. I told myself that if anything actually dangerous happened, I'd go. That night, the ground felt like it shifted while I was awake. It wasn't sudden. It was slow, almost gentle, like someone nudging a table across a floor. I lay there staring at the ceiling, watching the seam above me drift a few inches to the right. My body slid with it. My bag crinkled softly. No hands grabbed me. No one spoke. It just happened. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I don't know why. I think my brain just shut down and decided this was happening whether I understood it or not. By morning, the tent had moved enough that I could see a different cluster of trees out the door. The stakes ring had widened. More numbers. More lines. I noticed one stake had my shoe size carved into it. I don't know how they knew that. I don't know when they checked. I stopped exploring after that. I stayed close to the tent, like if I watched it hard enough, it couldn't be touched. I barely ate. I kept my phone on, even though it was useless, just to feel like I had something solid. The third night was quiet. No voices. No movement. I almost convinced myself it was over. Then I woke up with my head touching the tent wall when it hadn't been before. I sat up fast, heart racing, and finally did what I should have done earlier. I grabbed my bag and shoved everything inside without caring how messy it was. I didn't bother fixing the stakes. I didn't look for the ring. I just wanted to be gone. When I stepped out, I froze. The stakes were gone. All of them. The ground where they had been was smooth, like nothing had ever been there. My original tent stakes were pulled up and neatly stacked by the tree. My tent sat perfectly centered in a small clearing I didn't recognize at all. There was no note, no sign. Just the feeling that someone had put me exactly where they wanted me and then stepped back to see what I would do. I packed the rest of the way in a rush and left without looking behind me. I didn't stop until I hit pavement. I didn't go back for anything I might have forgotten. I still don't know how far they moved it in total. I still don't know why they cared. Sometimes I think about how careful they were, how patient. It wasn't random. It wasn't chaos. It was planned, measured, adjusted night after night. And the worst part is that if they hadn't talked that first morning, if I hadn't overheard them, I don't know how long it would have taken before I noticed at all. I knew something was wrong before I even opened my eyes because my alarm went off. That alone shouldn't sound scary, but it was. I had turned my alarm off the night before because I wanted to wake up naturally. I remember doing it clearly. I remember tapping the screen, watching the little icon disappear, tossing the phone into my bag like I was done with it. So when that sound dragged me out of sleep, sharp and loud in the quiet woods, my first thought wasn't fear. It was annoyance mixed with confusion. I slapped the phone quiet and just lay there for a second, staring at the ceiling of the tent. My head felt heavy, like I had slept too deep. I reached for the phone again to check the time, and that's when I noticed the battery. 100%. I actually laughed at first, like a tired little breath laugh. I remember thinking maybe the battery display was stuck or glitching. It had been at maybe 30% when I went to bed. There was no charger plugged in. There couldn't be. I didn't bring a power bank because I wanted to be disconnected. That was the whole point of this trip. Just me some food, and a place where my phone would slowly become useless. But there it was. Full, bright, warm in my hand. I sat up too fast and felt dizzy. I checked my bag, dumping everything out onto the floor of the tent. Clothes, snacks, a book I had never opened, my keys. No charger. No cable. Nothing even close to explaining it. I checked the phone again, like maybe it would change if I stared hard enough. It didn't. I tried to tell myself I had plugged it in somewhere and forgot. Maybe there was an outlet near the bathrooms and I had used it without thinking. Except I knew I hadn't. I hadn't left my site after dark. I hadn't walked anywhere with my phone. I had gone straight into the tent and stayed there. That's when I noticed the notification. Photos updated. My chest tightened. I opened my gallery, thumb hovering for a second like I was scared of what I might see. I had taken photos the day before, just dumb stuff. Trees, the creek, my tent looking crooked, a couple selfies where I looked sunburned and tired. Nothing special. Except some were gone. Not all of them, just a few. And not random ones either. The ones missing were the ones where there had been people in the background. Hikers on the trail. Someone sitting by the waterway behind me. Shapes I hadn't even paid attention to at the time. They were just gone. Cleanly removed. No empty spaces. No error messages, like they had never existed. I scrolled back and forth, my fingers starting to shake. I knew exactly which one should be there. I remember thinking one of them would be funny later, how someone had accidentally walked through my shot at the perfect moment. I had planned to send it to a friend. It wasn't there anymore. I checked the trash folder. Empty. I checked edit history. Nothing. My phone said the photos had been modified overnight. During the hours I had been asleep. I felt stupid sitting there freaking out over pictures, but it wasn't just that. It was the care of it. Whoever did this didn't wipe my phone or steal anything. They didn't add photos. They didn't leave a message. They just quietly removed specific people, like they were cleaning something up. I spent the rest of the morning pacing around my site. I tried to act normal whenever someone walked by, even though I wanted to grab them and ask if they had touched my phone. I watched everyone's hands, backpacks, pockets. I kept checking my phone battery like it might suddenly drop and prove I imagined everything. It stayed full until almost noon. That made it worse. By lunch, I convinced myself to test it. I turned the phone off completely and put it in my bag. I zipped it closed and set it under my sleeping pad so I would feel if anyone touched it. I didn't leave the site. I sat there eating and pretending to read my book, though I wasn't really reading. My eyes kept drifting to the tent. Nothing happened. No sounds. No footsteps close enough to worry about. After a few hours, I checked the phone again. Still on. Still at 100%. I felt my skin prickle all over. I knew I had powered it down. I remembered holding the button, sliding the option, watching the screen go black. Now it lit up instantly when I tapped it, like it had never been off at all. There was another change. More photos gone. This time it wasn't just backgrounds. A photo of the creek was cropped tighter, cutting out a shape I hadn't noticed before. A reflection in the water that looked almost like a person standing behind me. Another image had been rotated slightly, like someone had adjusted it to line something up. I sat there staring until my eyes hurt. I tried to convince myself this was some weird automatic feature. Face detection. Smart cleanup. Anything. But I had turned all that stuff off months ago. I hated when apps messed with my things. I thought about leaving then, I really did. Packing up and driving somewhere with cell service and normal walls. But again, that stubborn part of me kicked in. I didn't want to panic over something I couldn't prove. I didn't want to look back later and feel embarrassed. So I stayed. That night, I slept with the phone in my pocket. I woke up twice from the feeling of vibration, only to check and see nothing. No notifications. No missed calls. Just the battery still full, glowing softly in the dark. The third time I woke up, my phone was warm. Not just slightly. Actually warm, like it had been used for a long time. I checked the usage log. The screen time showed activity during the hours I was asleep. Scrolling. Opening apps. Going through photos. The log didn't say who or how, just that it happened. I felt sick. The next morning I walked to the bathrooms just to be around other people. I needed noise. Normal sounds, flushing toilets and running water and footsteps. I stood at the sink longer than necessary, staring at my own face and trying to steady my breathing. When I checked my phone again, there was a new folder. It was named Backups. Inside were copies of my photos. Not all of them. Just the ones that had been edited or removed. I opened one and my heart dropped. The people were still there in these versions. Clearer even, like someone had enhanced them. Zoomed in. Sharpened edges. Circled shapes with a crop tool. Faces. I recognized one. It was from a photo I took on the trail, where a guy had been far behind me, barely noticeable. In this version, his face was sharp enough to make out details, and he was looking straight at the camera, straight at me. I closed the folder and shoved the phone into my pocket like it had burned me. I went back to my site and started packing without thinking about order or neatness. Clothes went in first, then food, then everything else. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped my keys twice. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone standing there watching me react. When I reached for my phone to check the time, there was a note on the screen. It wasn't a message notification. It was just there, like a reminder that hadn't existed before. It said that power was easier when I didn't fight it. I didn't try to figure out how it got there. I finished packing and zipped the tent shut for the last time. Before I left, I checked the phone one more time. The battery finally started to drop as I walked, ticking down like normal. 99, 98, like it was pretending to be normal again. When I got to my car, I noticed something else. My phone connected to the car charger the second I sat down, even though I hadn't plugged it in yet. The charging icon popped up on its own. I stared at it until it faded, then plugged the cable in for real just to feel in control. The dried out felt longer than it should have. Every tree looked the same. Every turn felt delayed. When I finally hit a spot with service, my phone buzzed nonstop as messages poured in. I didn't open any of them. I just wanted to get home. That night, back in my room, I tried to go through my photos again. The backups folder was gone. The edited versions were now the only versions. It was clean, organized, like nothing strange had ever happened. Except one thing. My front camera roll had a new photo at the top. It was taken in the dark, grainy, my tent from the outside, a faint glow coming from inside, right where my phone had been. The timestamp said it was taken while I was asleep. The battery percentage in the corner said 100%. I didn't even notice the trash at first. It blended in too well, like it belonged there. A crushed can by a tree, a torn wrapper half buried in dirt, a faded plastic bag caught on a branch. I remember thinking people were gross and careless, and that this was why I usually avoided popular trails. It annoyed me more than it scared me, which is kind of embarrassing now. I had picked this place because it was familiar but not close. A state park a few hours away from where I live, far enough that I wouldn't run into anyone I knew, close enough that I didn't need to plan much. I had been here once when I was younger, on a school trip, and I barely remembered it. That made it feel safe in a boring way. The trail started normal. Packed dirt, trees on both sides, sunlight breaking through in uneven patches. The trash started about 10 minutes in. At first it was random. A bottle cap. A napkin. Nothing that stood out. I kept walking, stepping around it, still half in my head thinking about stuff that didn't matter. Then I saw the shoe. It was old, worn down, one of those cheap sneakers with the foam showing through the side. It was placed right in the middle of the path, toes pointing forward like it was meant to be followed. I stopped and stared at it longer than I should have. Something about the way it sat there felt deliberate. Not tossed. Not forgotten. I checked around for the other one. Nothing. I took a photo without thinking, just to send to a friend later and joke about it. Then I kept going. A few minutes later, there was a cracked phone case on a rock. Same cheap kind I used to have years ago, back when I still dropped my phone constantly. It was the same color, too. Black with a corner bent inward. I felt a little jolt then, but I brushed it off. Common item. Common color. I told myself that. The trash started to form a pattern after that. Not a line exactly, but spaced just enough that you'd see one piece, walk a bit, then see the next. It kept me moving forward without realizing it. A receipt pinned under a stone. A broken earbud. A keychain shaped like a cartoon character I used to be obsessed with when I was younger. That one made me stop. I hadn't seen one of those in years. I used to have the same one on my backpack in middle school. I lost it during a move and was weirdly upset about it at the time. Seeing it there, scratched and faded, made my stomach tighten. I picked it up. It was warm from the sun. Real, not something my brain made up. I looked around the trail, expecting someone to be watching me laugh or point or something. There was no one, just trees and bugs and the sound of my own breathing getting louder. I checked my phone then, more out of habit than fear. No signal. Battery fine. Nothing weird. I kept going slower now. The next item was a folded piece of paper tucked into the roots of a tree. I knew what it was before I touched it. I had written on paper like that once, years ago, when I was bored in class and didn't have my phone. It was one of those dumb lists I used to make and then post about online later. Things I wanted to do, places I wanted to go, stuff that felt huge at the time. I unfolded it with shaking hands. It was a copy. Same handwriting, same spelling mistakes, same dumb doodle in the corner. Even the coffee stain was there, the one I had spilled on it by accident and then complained about online. I didn't post a photo of that paper back then. I remember that clearly. I only talked about it. I joked about how I lost it during the move and how it was probably stuck in a box somewhere forever. Except it was here. I sat down hard on a log and tried to breathe. My head felt too full, like all my thoughts were crowding each other. I kept telling myself this had to be a coincidence stacked on top of coincidence. Someone else could have the same shoe size, the same phone case, the same stupid keychain. But the paper ruined that. I stood up and almost turned around. I really wanted to. But the trail ahead dipped down and curved, and I could see something else ahead. Something red. A shirt. My shirt. I knew it instantly. Gray with a faded red graphic on the front. I used to wear it all the time until it ripped at the seam, and I complained about it in a post, saying I hated throwing it away but didn't want to fix it. I even joked about how it would probably end up in the landfill or on the side of a road somewhere. There it was, draped over a low branch like it had been placed there on purpose. The rip was still there, the same shape, the same spot. I didn't touch it. I backed up a step and looked behind me. The trail behind looked longer than it should have, stretched out, empty. I felt watched then, not in a dramatic way. More like the feeling you get when you know someone understands you better than you expected, like being seen without permission. I forced myself to keep going, mostly out of stubbornness. I didn't want to give whoever did this the satisfaction of scaring me off halfway. My legs felt shaky, but they kept moving. The trash started to change after that. It wasn't just old stuff anymore. It was arranged. 3 bottle caps in a triangle. A line of wrappers spelling out a word if you looked at it from the right angle. I recognized the word immediately. It was a username I used years ago, one I had forgotten about until that second. I hadn't used it since I was like 14. I felt dizzy. I thought about all the stuff I had posted back then, the oversharing, the jokes, the complaints, the random thoughts I threw into the void because it felt safe, because it felt like no one really paid attention. Someone had. The farther I went, the more personal it got. Screenshots printed on paper and torn into pieces, then taped back together. Quotes from posts I barely remembered writing. Even timestamps scribbled on bits of cardboard. Dates, times, patterns showing when I posted more, when I disappeared, when I came back. It was a map. Not of the trail. Of me. I realized then that the trash wasn't leading me somewhere random. It was leading me through my own history. Each item matched a phase, a year, a version of me I thought was gone. I could almost predict what would come next, and that scared me more than the surprises. I started crying without meaning to. Not loud. Just tears slipping down while I walked, wiping them away angrily like that would fix anything. I felt stupid for ever thinking the internet was forgetful. The trail opened up into a small clearing I didn't remember from the map. In the center was a pile. Not messy. Carefully stacked. Layers of objects, all facing the same direction. On top was my old backpack. The one I used all through high school. The one with the broken zipper and the pen marks inside the pocket. I had thrown it away after posting about how it smelled like stress and cheap snacks. I joked about how it had seen every bad day with me. I stepped closer without thinking. Inside the backpack were more things. Printed screenshots of my posts lay flat. Notes written in my handwriting, but not by me. Annotations pointing out patterns. Predictions scribbled in the margins. Little arrows showing how one post led to another, how my reactions could be guessed based on past ones. They knew how I would react. That line popped into my head, uninvited and heavy. I felt sick. I didn't hear anyone behind me. There were no footsteps, no sounds except the wind, but I knew then that this wasn't about watching me from the trees. It was about knowing me well enough to not need to. I dropped the backpack and backed away. My foot kicked something and I looked down. It was my current phone case, the one on my phone right now. I picked it up slowly, my hands numb. It had a small scratch in the corner that I hadn't posted about yet, one I noticed last week and ignored. They were ahead of me. I turned and ran. I didn't follow the trash back. I cut through the woods, branches scraping at my arms, not caring where I was going as long as it was away. I tripped twice. I didn't stop. My chest burned and my vision blurred, but I kept moving until I hit the edge of the trail again near the parking lot. I sat on the ground for a long time after that, trying to get my breathing under control. People walked by. Families. Couples. No one looked at me twice. When I finally stood up, my phone buzzed. Still no signal, but there was a notification saved offline. A draft post. Not published. Just sitting there. It was written in my tone, my style, complaining lightly, joking about how predictable I was, how I'd always followed patterns even when I thought I was being spontaneous. It ended mid-sentence, like it was waiting. I deleted it. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I packed up and left earlier than planned. I didn't take any photos. I didn't check my phone much. That night, back where I live, I went through my old accounts and deleted what I could. Posts, comments, everything. It took hours. Some things I couldn't remove. Some platforms didn't even exist anymore. The next morning, my trash bin outside was knocked over. Everything inside was arranged neatly on the ground. I didn't plan this trip. That's probably the biggest difference between this one and the others. This wasn't a reset or a break or a personal challenge. It was a last-minute thing because my power was out back home, and my roommate had people over and I didn't want to deal with any of it. I threw my gear in the trunk, drove until the road signs started thinning out, and picked a campground that still had space. The place felt wrong in a boring way. Not spooky, just off. Like a school hallway after hours. Everything too quiet, but not abandoned. There were campers spread out, but everyone stayed close to their own sites. No music. No kids yelling. No one waving or nodding as I walked by. I told myself it was just the vibe. I set up before sunset and took a walk to stretch my legs. That's when I heard them. At first it sounded like normal camp talk. Low voices, steady, relaxed. The kind of conversation you only have when you assume no one else is around. I wasn't trying to listen. I was just following the path toward the bathrooms when the words started lining up in my head. They were talking about terrain. Specifically how uneven it was. How certain slopes would make things roll instead of slide. How a stumble could look natural if it happened in the right place. The words didn't hit all at once. It was more like my brain kept catching up a few seconds late, replaying what I had just heard and realizing it wasn't normal. I slowed down without meaning to. They mentioned rocks that weren't visible at dusk, loose gravel near the edge of a drop. They talked about how long it would take for someone to be found depending on time of day. Morning foot traffic versus evening quiet. I remember thinking they sounded like they were planning a hike. Then they said accident. They didn't say it like a scary word. They said it like a category, like weather, like it was something you could plan around if you were careful enough. I stopped walking. That's when they paused. The silence was sharp, like I had crossed a line without knowing it was there. Leaves still moved. Bugs still made noise, but their voices were gone, cut off mid-thought. I coughed. I didn't mean to. It just happened, dry and loud in my throat. The kind of sound you can't pretend it didn't come from you. When they started talking again, it wasn't the same. They acknowledged me without saying my name. They shifted topics just enough to feel intentional. And then one of them asked something that made my stomach drop. They asked whether mornings or evenings were better. Not in a friendly way. Not like small talk. It was framed like a preference, like ordering food, like they were offering me a choice. I didn't answer. I didn't move. I don't even remember breathing for a second. I just stood there staring at the dirt, waiting for my body to decide what to do. After a few seconds, they laughed. Not loud. Not nervous. Just enough to smooth things over. Then they walked away, deeper into the trees, like the conversation was finished. I stood there long after they were gone. My brain kept trying to soften it, Maybe they were talking about safety planning. Maybe it was some weird training thing. Maybe they were just messing with me. But none of those explanations fit the tone, or the timing, or the way they stopped the second they realized I was there. I went back to my site and stayed put. I didn't cook. I didn't walk around. I sat in a folding chair and watched the light fade. Every time someone passed, my shoulders tightened. I kept replaying the question in my head, over and over, like if I analyzed it enough, it would turn into something harmless. Mornings or evenings? Around midnight, I noticed movement near the far edge of my site. Not close enough to confront, just shapes shifting between trees. I turned my head slowly, pretending I hadn't noticed. The movement stopped when I looked. I went into my tent and zipped it all the way shut. Sleep didn't really happen. I drifted in and out, always alert. Every sound felt like it had intent behind it. Footsteps far away. Fabric rustling. The wind moving things it shouldn't be able to move. At some point, I realized my tent was angled slightly downhill. I was sliding toward the door without moving. I had set it up on level ground. I remembered checking. Now my bag was pressed against my legs and my pillow had shifted sideways. I pushed myself upright and checked outside. The ground hadn't changed. But my tent stakes were tighter than before, pressed deeper, like someone had adjusted them to lock the position in. I didn't sleep after that. When morning came, the campground felt different. Lighter. People walked around like normal humans again. Someone made coffee. Someone laughed. It almost made me feel embarrassed for how scared I had been. I packed slowly, trying not to look rushed. That's when I noticed the footprints. They circled my site, not close enough to trip over, but close enough to show intent. Multiple shoe sizes, overlapping paths, like people had walked around and around, testing angles. I followed one set for a few steps and saw where it stopped, right at the edge of a small drop behind my tent that I hadn't noticed before. From there, it would have been easy to fall. I sat in my car for a long time before starting the engine. I told myself I was done, that I would leave and forget about it and chalk it up to paranoia. But as I drove out, I passed the same group from the night before. They were standing near the trailhead, checking something on a map. They looked normal, friendly even. One of them glanced at my car. I didn't look back. I drove straight through until I hit a diner off the highway and stopped because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I sat there with a cup of coffee I didn't drink, staring out the window, trying to ground myself in normal life. That's when my phone buzzed. No signal, but a notification from my notes app popped up. A reminder I didn't set. It listed times, sunrise, sunset, foot traffic estimates, weather conditions. At the bottom was a line I definitely didn't write. Preference still undecided. I deleted it. Then I deleted the app. I went home after that, back to where I live. I didn't camp for a long time. A few weeks later, I checked the news out of curiosity. A brief article about an injury at that campground. Someone slipped near a trail edge just after dusk. Non-fatal. Lucky timing. They called it an accident. I closed the page and didn't read any further. The worst part about this didn't start in the woods. It started in my car with that empty pocket feeling. You know, the one where your hand checks the same spot twice because your brain refuses to accept what your fingers already know. I had that feeling before I even parked. I tapped my jeans at a red light, felt my main key, felt my wallet, felt my phone. Everything was there. Still, something felt wrong, like my body knew a detail my head hadn't caught up to yet. I ignored it and kept driving. This campground was supposed to be easy. Not remote, not sketchy, just far enough from a highway to feel quiet. The kind of place with numbered sites, picnic tables, and bathrooms that smelled like cleaning chemicals instead of rot. I picked it because I didn't want surprises. I had a long week, a short fuse, and zero interest in drama. I parked, killed the engine, and sat there for a second longer than usual. That empty pocket feeling came back. I checked again. Same result. Everything accounted for. I told myself to relax. I set up camp fast. Tent up. Cooler out. Chair unfolded. The sun was still high, and people were around doing normal stuff. Kids riding bikes. Someone cooking something that smelled way better than what I brought. It felt safe. Predictable. I decided to use the restroom before settling in. The building was concrete and ugly but clean. fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. I went straight to the sink to wash my hands first, mostly out of habit. That's when I saw it. The key was hanging from a hook near the paper towel dispenser. At first, I didn't think it was mine. It was just a key. People forget stuff all the time. But then my brain did that quiet click thing where pieces line up without asking permission. Same brand, same worn edges, same small scratch near the top where I dropped it years ago in a parking lot and pretended not to care. I stepped closer. It was my spare car key. Not a copy, not similar. Mine, the one I kept hidden at home for emergencies. The one I never brought camping. The one I hadn't seen in months. It hung there openly, swinging slightly in the air from the movement of the door. Attached to it was a small white tag. Backup. That was all it said. No handwriting flourish, just clean printed letters. My mouth went dry. I checked my pockets again like that would change reality. Main key still there. This one should not exist in this place. I didn't touch it at first. I just stared, waiting for someone to walk in and laugh or explain or do anything that made sense. No one came. I leaned in and noticed something else. The key was warm. Not hot, just warm, like it had been held recently, used. I grabbed it without thinking and yanked it off the hook. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. I turned it over in my hand, checking every detail, hoping to find some tiny difference that would prove I was wrong. There wasn't one. On the back of the tag, barely visible unless you tilted it toward the light, were small marks. Scratches, short lines, too even to be random. I counted them. 14. I didn't know why that number mattered, but my stomach dropped anyway. I left the restroom fast, shoved the key into my pocket, and walked back to my site like nothing was wrong. I kept my pace steady. I didn't look around too much. I didn't want to look like someone who had just discovered something impossible. I sat in my chair and stared at my car. Nothing looked different. Doors closed. Windows up. Exactly how I left it. I pulled out my main key and clicked the lock. The car unlocked. I clicked it again. Locked. Normal. I told myself that meant something. That it meant I was safe. That maybe someone had found my spare months ago and decided to mess with me now in a dumb way. A prank that went too far. Except no one knew where I live. No one knew where I camped, and no one could have guessed this place. As it got darker, that sense of being watched crept in. Not the dramatic kind. The quiet kind that makes you aware of your own movements. I ate without tasting anything. I checked my phone even though there was barely any signal. I kept my keys on the table in front of me like they were proof of something. Around 9, I noticed something else. My car's side mirrors were folded in. I never fold them in. I stood up slowly and walked closer. The doors were still locked. No damage. No signs of a break-in. I unlocked it, unfolded the mirrors, then locked it again. That's when I saw the mark on the driver's side handle. A faint smudge, like oil from fingers. Fresh. I wiped it with my sleeve and stepped back, suddenly aware of how quiet everything was again. Too quiet, like the campground had collectively decided to hold its breath. I went to my tent early. I slept badly. Every sound pulled me back to the surface. Sometime after midnight, I heard footsteps on gravel. Slow, deliberate, not passing through, circling. I didn't move. I didn't unzip anything. I stayed still and counted breaths. At one point, I heard a soft click. Not loud enough to echo, just enough to recognize. The sound of a car door unlocking. I sat up so fast my head spun. I grabbed my phone and checked the time. No notifications. No alerts. Nothing. I waited. Minutes passed. Nothing else happened. Eventually, exhaustion dragged me under again. Morning light didn't make me feel better. It just made everything clearer. I stepped out of the tent and went straight to my car. The trunk was open. Not wide, just enough to show the gap. Inside, nothing was missing. Nothing new either. Except my emergency kit had been moved, rearranged, items placed back in slightly different positions. The flashlight was facing the other direction. The jumper cables were coiled tighter than I ever bothered doing. Someone had gone through it carefully. I slammed the trunk shut and stood there breathing hard. That empty pocket feeling came back, stronger this time. I checked my keys. Both were still there. I didn't eat breakfast. I packed fast, hands clumsy, dropping things and swearing under my breath. I just wanted to leave. Before I did, I went back to the restroom. The hook where the key had been was empty, but taped underneath it was another tag. Same white plastic, same printed letters. Lock tested repeatedly. My stomach flipped. I ripped it down and crumpled it in my fist. I didn't stay long enough to think about what repeatedly meant. I drove out of there without stopping. The first gas station I saw, I pulled in and parked under a camera. I sat there shaking, staring at my car like it might do something on its own. That's when my phone buzzed. A notification from my car's app. Driver door unlocked. Timestamp at 2:14 a.m. I checked the activity log. 14 unlocks. I didn't go home after that. Not right away. I drove around until my hands stopped shaking. When I finally went back to where I live, I checked every room before going inside. I changed my locks the next day. It cost $240 and took 2 hours. The guy asked if I wanted extra copies made. I said no. I still had the spare key. I didn't throw it away. I don't know why. It sits in a drawer, wrapped in tape, tag still attached. Sometimes when I can't sleep, I take it out and count the scratches again. They haven't changed. I only brought the camera because my phone lens was cracked. That's it. No deep reason. No plan to document anything. I borrowed the camera from my cousin the night before I left, tossed it into my bag, and barely thought about it again until the second day. It was one of those small, outdated digital cameras that still had buttons instead of a touchscreen. Felt solid, reliable, like it wouldn't pull anything weird. I picked this campground because it was empty on the map. Not closed, just ignored. A place people skipped over on their way is somewhere better. That suited me fine. I wasn't looking to meet anyone. I just wanted space and quiet and enough time to clear my head without someone asking questions. The first day went fine. Boring, even. I hiked a short loop, set up camp. Ate something stat out of a foil pouch. I took a few photos here and there without thinking about it. Trees. The lake. My tent from a couple angles because I liked how the light hit it in the afternoon. That night, I scrolled through the pictures before bed. That's when I noticed something off, though I didn't understand what it was yet. It was more like a feeling than a thought, like my eyes were skipping over something they didn't want to process. I chalked it up to being tired and shut the camera off. The next morning was clear and quiet. No wind. The lake looked flat and fake, like a painted surface. I stood near the water and took a few more photos, including one of myself using the timer. I set the camera on a rock, stepped back, waited for the beep, and stood still. The photo looked fine at first. I checked it right there, squinting in the sun. Trees behind me. Water to the side. Same clothes I was wearing. Same posture. Except I wasn't in it. I frowned and checked the next photo, thinking maybe I had moved too soon or the angle was off. Same frame. Same background. Still no me. I laughed once, sharp and confused, and picked up the camera. I checked the lens for dirt. I checked the settings. Everything looked normal. I stepped back into frame and took another photo, this time waving one hand like an idiot. When I checked the screen, my arm was gone. Not blurred, not cropped, just missing. The space where I should have been was filled with the background, perfectly clean, like I had never stood there at all. I felt a rush of heat crawl up my neck. I turned the camera toward the lake and snapped a random shot just to see if it worked. The photo came up fine. I took a picture of my boots. They showed up. I took a picture of my hand holding a stick. The stick showed up. My hand didn't. I stood there staring at the screen until my eyes hurt. The longer I looked, the more wrong it felt. It wasn't glitchy or distorted. It was precise. Accurate. Like the camera knew exactly what to remove. I shoved it back into my bag and went back to my site, telling myself it was broken. Some censored issue. Some dumb technical thing I didn't understand. I didn't want to think about it too hard. I avoided the camera for the rest of the day. That night, I sat by the fire longer than planned, just to delay going into the tent. The dark felt heavier than usual. Not threatening, just crowded, like it was full of things I couldn't see. When I finally crawled into my sleeping bag, I heard footsteps near the edge of my sight, not close enough to confront, just enough to register. I held my breath and waited. Nothing happened. I slept badly. The next morning, I decided to pack up early. Not fully leave, but at least get things ready. I wanted to feel like I had control over something. While I was stuffing clothes into my bag, the camera slipped out and hit the ground. The screen turned on by itself. There was a new photo. It took me a second to understand what I was looking at. It was my campsite. Same angle as one I had taken the day before. Same tree on the left. Same cooler by the table. Except someone was standing where I had been when I took the original. They were facing the camera. The image was slightly out of focus, like the camera hadn't decided what to prioritize. I could make out a general shape. Same height as me. Same build. Same clothes. But the face was wrong. Not blurred. Not hidden. Just not mine. The features didn't settle into anything recognizable, like they were in between expressions, in between shapes. I dropped the camera. It hit the dirt and kept playing the little preview sound over and over until I grabbed it again and shut it off. My heart was pounding so hard I felt it in my teeth. I looked around the site, spinning slowly, expecting to see someone standing there, matching the photo. No one was there. I checked the timestamp. The photo had been taken 15 minutes earlier. I hadn't touched the camera in hours. I sat down hard on the ground and tried to slow my breathing. My thoughts kept tripping over each other. I wanted to leave, but the idea of packing everything while that photo existed felt wrong, like turning my back on something unfinished. I turned the camera back on. The photo was still there. I zoomed in. The closer I got, the worse it looked. The background stayed sharp, but the figure didn't resolve. It was like the camera refused to fully capture it, except for one detail. The eyes. They were clear. They were looking straight at the lens. I felt cold then, not from the air, from somewhere deeper. I powered the camera off again and shoved it into the bottom of my bag, burying it under clothes like that would help. I finished packing in silence. Before leaving, I took one last look around the site, trying to memorize it in a normal way. Trees, dirt, table, nothing out of place. I walked toward the car and stopped. My reflection in the car window was wrong. At first, I thought it was just the angle. The glass was tinted. The light was weird. But as I shifted side to side, the reflection didn't move the way it should have. There was a delay, a fraction of a second. Then it stopped copying me at all. The reflection stayed still while I moved. I raised my hand slowly. The reflection didn't. Instead, it turned its head. I stumbled back, heart slamming, and the reflection snapped back into place like nothing had happened. Perfectly normal. Perfectly mine. I unlocked the car with shaking hands and got inside. I drove without checking mirrors. I didn't stop until I hit a rest area with people and noise and vending machines humming. I parked, leaned my head against the steering wheel, and breathed until the panic eased enough to think. I needed proof. Something solid. Something I could look at and say this was real. I pulled the camera out again. The photo was gone. Every photo with me in it was gone. The camera roll jumped from landscapes straight to empty frames. Gaps where images should have been. The numbering skipped. The timestamps remained. But the last photo was still there. The one with the figure standing where I should have been. Only now, when I zoomed in, I saw something new. The figure was closer. Not in the frame. In posture. In detail. The clothes were clearer. The shape of the face had shifted slightly, like it was settling into something more defined. More familiar. I slammed the camera shut and stuffed it into the glove box. The rest of the drive passed in a blur. When I finally got back to where I live, I didn't bring the camera inside. I left it in the car overnight, locked, like that made sense. The next morning, curiosity won. I went back out and grabbed it. The battery was dead. I charged it inside, watching it the whole time like it might do something on its own. When it finally turned on, the screen lit up immediately. New photo. Taken from inside my car. The angle was wrong. Low, tilted, like the camera had been held at chest level by someone sitting in the back seat. I was in the frame this time. Standing outside the car, looking down at the camera. The look on my face made my stomach drop. It wasn't fear. It was confusion. Like I was trying to figure out why something wasn't copying me anymore. I deleted the photo. The camera froze. I pulled the battery out and threw it in the trash. I don't use cameras anymore. Sometimes when I catch my reflection in dark glass or a turned off screen, I wait a second longer than I should, just to make sure it moves when I do. I didn't lose my voice until the third day, which is funny because that's when I needed it the most. Up until then, the trip had been loud in a normal way. Wind in the trees, birds fighting over crumbs, my own footsteps crunching along paths that felt older than everything else. I talked to myself a lot those first days. Not full conversations, just random comments under my breath. Complaining about rocks in my shoes, reading snacks out loud, saying stuff just to hear a human sound. By day 3, my throat felt scraped raw. I blamed the cold nights and the cheap coffee packets. I stopped talking and started texting instead, even though there was no service. Habit more than logic. I would type messages to friends, not send them, just save them in drafts. Stuff like how quiet it was, how the woods felt closer than usual, how I kept thinking I heard people but never saw anyone. I figured I would send them later when I got signal, laugh about how dramatic I sounded. That morning, I took a longer hike than planned. The trail curved away from the campground and dipped into thicker trees where the light barely reached the ground. It felt good at first. Cooler, more private. I liked how the sounds changed, like the forest was swallowing them before they could echo. About an hour in, I realized how quiet it had gotten. Not peaceful quiet. Empty quiet. No birds. No bugs. Even my footsteps sounded wrong, like they were being muted after the fact. I stopped walking just to test it. I shifted my weight, scuffed my boot. The sound came back delayed, half a second late. I frowned and kept going. That's when I heard my name. It came from the trees to my right, just off the trail. Clear, familiar, my own voice. I froze so hard my knees locked. At first, my brain tried to reject it. People hear things all the time in the woods. Wind through branches can sound like words if you want it to, but this wasn't vague. It wasn't a shape that could be anything. It was my voice saying my name the exact way I say it. Same tone, same slight drag on the second syllable. I didn't answer. I stood there listening, heart pounding, waiting to hear footsteps or laughter or anything that would make it make sense. Nothing followed. The trees stood still. The trail stayed empty. I backed up slowly, eyes scanning the woods. I didn't turn my back. I didn't run. I just moved away until the trail widened again and the light came back. The rest of the hike passed in a haze. I kept replaying the sound in my head, trying to find a flaw, something to prove it wasn't real. By the time I got back to camp, my throat felt even worse, tight and dry, like it was reacting to something I hadn't said. I sat at the picnic table and pulled out my phone. One of the draft messages was gone. I knew it had been there. I remembered typing it while sitting on a rock earlier, thumbs cold, complaining about how the woods felt too quiet. Nah, but wasn't in drafts. It wasn't sent either. It was just gone. I checked the message log. Marked read. My stomach dropped. No recipient. No timestamp. Just the word read next to the text preview, like it had been seen by someone and dismissed. I shut the phone screen off and shoved it into my pocket. The afternoon dragged. I stayed close to camp, busying myself with dumb tasks just to avoid thinking. Reorganizing gear. Cleaning things that weren't dirty. Watching the tree line like it might blink. As the sun started to dip, my phone buzzed. Another draft gone. Another message marked read. This one I remembered clearly. I had typed it earlier while pacing, saying I was starting to feel weird and might leave early. It hadn't been dramatic, just honest. Now it was gone. I checked my sent messages. Empty. I checked deleted messages. Empty. I checked app permissions like that would help. Everything looked normal. That's when I heard it again. This time, it wasn't my name. It was a sentence. The exact sentence I had typed earlier. Same wording. Same pause in the middle where I had hesitated before finishing it. Same tone I use when I'm trying to sound casual about something that isn't casual at all. It came from behind my tent. I spun around so fast I got dizzy. Nothing was there. The voice continued anyway, drifting between trees, moving slightly as if whoever was speaking was walking. It repeated the sentence once, then added the next line from the message, word for word, even the typo I hadn't bothered fixing. My legs felt weak. I backed away until I hit the picnic table and sat down hard, staring at the darkening woods like they were a screen playing something meant just for me. The voice stopped as suddenly as it started. I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys and headed for the car, planning to just sit inside until my hands stopped shaking. When I pulled the handle, it wouldn't open. Locked. That made no sense. I never locked my car at camp. I unlocked it with a fob and climbed in, slamming the door harder than necessary. I sat there breathing fast, staring straight ahead, telling myself to calm down. The phone buzzed again. Another message marked read. This one hadn't even been typed yet. It was something I had thought earlier, a sentence I had almost written but decided not to because it felt too dramatic. Seeing it there on the screen, summarized and stripped down to text, made my skin crawl. I turned the phone off. The woods stayed quiet. I spent the night in the car with the doors locked. I didn't sleep much. Every time I drifted off, I thought I heard movement nearby. Not footsteps, something lighter, like someone pacing just outside my field of vision. Around dawn, my throat hurt less. I took that as a good sign, even though I didn't know why. I decided to pack up and leave as soon as there was enough light. As I stepped out of the car, I heard it again. My voice. But this time it was crying. I froze mid-step, one foot on gravel, one on dirt. The sound came from deeper in the woods, further than before. It was softer, strained, like my throat actually did feel the night before. It called for help using words I had typed the night before and then deleted. Words I hadn't said out loud to anyone. The tone was wrong in a way I can't fully explain. It wasn't panicked enough. It sounded practiced, like someone trying to sound scared based on notes. I wanted to yell, to prove I was still the real one, but my voice wouldn't come out. All I managed was a dry rasp that didn't sound like me at all. The crying voice stopped. Then it laughed. Not loud, not cartoonish, just a quiet, breathy sound that carried farther than it should have. I backed for the car, hands shaking, never taking my eyes off the trees. The voice didn't follow. It stayed where it was, like it didn't need to move closer. I packed as fast as I could. I didn't fold anything. I didn't check for trash. I just shoved everything into the trunk and slammed it shut. When I got in the driver's seat, my phone turned on by itself. There was one last message. It wasn't marked read yet. It was a draft. Written in my style, my shorthand, my bad punctuation. It talked about how strange the trip had been, how the woods mess with your head, how do you start hearing things that aren't real if you stay too long. At the bottom was a line I knew I wouldn't have written. Voice works better than text. I didn't delete it. I put the phone face down and drove. I didn't stop until I hit a stretch of road with service. My phone buzzed nonstop as messages finally went through. Friends asking if I was okay, reacting to things I didn't remember sending. I pulled over and checked. They were confused, concerned, quoting messages back to me that I hadn't typed. Messages describing the woods, the quiet, the feeling of being watched. All marked red. Sent while I was asleep in my car. I turned the phone off and kept driving. That night, back where I lived, my throat finally felt normal again. I tested my voice quietly, saying my own name just to hear it come from my mouth. It sounded right. I didn't text anyone for a long time after that. When I finally did, I kept messages short, boring, nothing personal. Sometimes when my phone is on the table and the room is quiet, the screen lights up without buzzing, just for a second. I never flip it over fast. I didn't even want to check in. That's the part that still bugs me. I almost skipped the office completely and just parked at the site number the email told me to use. I only went inside because it felt polite, like something a normal person does. Walk in, nod, confirm your name, get the little paper map you don't really need. If I hadn't done that, I might not know any of this happened. The office was small and way too bright. Big windows, fake wood counter, a corkboard full of faded flyers about lost dogs and pancake breakfasts that probably already happened. It smelled like dust and cleaning spray. There were no other campers inside, just me and the woman behind the counter clicking through something on her computer. I gave my name, first and last, normal volume, normal tone. She paused. Not dramatically, just enough that I noticed. Her fingers stopped moving. She leaned closer to the screen and squinted like she had read something twice. Then she smiled in a way that didn't quite reach her eyes and said my name again slower. I nodded. She tilted her head and said that was interesting. That's when I felt that little drop in my stomach, the one you get when you know a conversation just turned, but you don't know why yet. I asked what she meant, trying to keep it casual. She turned the monitor slightly so I could see. The screen was full. Rows and rows of reservations, same campground, same weekend, different sites, all under my name. Not just my name either. Variations, full name. Nickname I haven't used since high school, my middle initial. My old last name from before my parents split. One even had my full address from a place I haven't lived in for years. Every single site was booked. By me. I stared at the screen, waiting for it to click into something funny. A glitch, a prank, some weird system error. But the longer I looked, the worse it got. Different emails, different phone numbers. Some real, some old, some I didn't recognize at all. I told her it wasn't me. She nodded like she believed me, but not fully, like she had heard this before. She said it happens sometimes, when someone plans ahead, when someone really wants a specific area locked down. That sentence stuck with me. She said it like it was normal. She said all the sites had been booked weeks ago, spaced out evenly so no one else could reserve nearby. Like someone wanted privacy, but not isolation, like they wanted to control the distance between people. I asked if she could cancel them. She hesitated. She said technically yes, but it would take time, and since the reservations were paid, it might cause issues. Refunds. Verifications. She asked if I was sure I wanted to do that. I didn't like how she asked that. I said I just wanted my site, the one I booked. She scrolled again, slower this time. Then she frowned. She said my site wasn't available, because it was already checked in. I felt my face go hot. I told her that wasn't possible. I had just arrived. My car was still cooling down outside. She looked up at me and said the system showed someone had checked in under my name an hour ago. Same license plate number. Same car description. She asked if someone else had driven ahead of me. I didn't answer. She printed a map and slid it across the counter. She circled one site with a pen, said that was where the system placed me now. An overflow spot. Not ideal, but it should work for the night. I asked about the original site. She said it was occupied. By who? She paused again. Then she said by me. I took the map and walked out without saying anything else. The campground felt different after that. Smaller, like everything had shifted inward. Cars were parked at almost every site, but I didn't see people moving around much. Curtains drawn, tents zipped, fires already burning even though it wasn't dark yet. I drove to the overflow site and parked. My hands were shaking enough that I had to sit there for a minute before getting out. I walked the loop, slow, casual, trying not to look like I was searching for myself. When I reached the site I had originally booked, my chest tightened. My tent was there. Same color, same brand, same small tier near the bottom seam that I keep meaning to fix. My cooler sat next to it, lid slightly crooked the way I always leave it. My chair was unfolded, angled toward the fire pit. The fire pit had ashes in it, still warm. Someone had been there recently. I stepped closer and stopped. There was a notebook on the table. Mine. I recognized the dent in the cover, the way the corner curled. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside were notes, pages filled front and back. Not drawings, not plans. Observations. Times I usually wake up. How long I take to pack. The order I do things in without thinking. Notes about how I react to sounds at night, which direction I look first when startled. I flipped faster, panic rising. There were dates. Future dates. Predictions. Some crossed out, some circled, some with little check marks next to them. I slammed the notebook shut and backed away like it could bite me. I heard movement behind me. I turned fast. No one was there, but the tent flap rustled slightly, like someone inside had shifted their weight. I didn't unzip it. I didn't call out. I backed away slowly until I hit my car. I went straight back to the office. The lights were off. Closed sign flipped. I checked my phone. No signal. I sat in the car and locked the doors. I stayed there until it got dark. At some point, headlights turned on at a site across from me. Someone stepped out, stretched, and went back inside. Normal behavior. Normal world. I convinced myself I was overreacting. I set up at the overflow site, keeping my movements tight and quiet. I didn't use my usual gear. I didn't follow my habits. I told myself if someone was watching, I wouldn't give them what they expected. Sleep didn't happen. Sometime after midnight, I heard footsteps approaching my site. Slow, familiar. Same rhythm as mine. They stopped just outside my tent. I held my breath. I heard the sound of a zipper. Not mine. From across the loop. My original site. Then footsteps again, walking away, matching my pace perfectly. In the morning, I packed early. I didn't eat. I didn't check anything twice. I just wanted to leave before whatever was happening decided I had stayed long enough. When I reached my car, I stopped cold. It was already loaded. My gear, my bags, packed exactly how I do it. Heavy stuff first. Soft things wedged in the corners. Nothing rattling. I checked the trunk latch. Closed. Secure. On the driver's seat was a folded piece of paper. I didn't touch it at first. Then I did. It was a note. Short, clean, written in my handwriting but steadier. It said staying was easier. Nothing else. No explanation, no threat. Just a statement. I got in the car and drove. I didn't stop until I hit the highway. A mile out, my phone buzzed. Signal came back. I had a confirmation email. Another reservation. Same campground. Next month. Already paid. I always leave early when I camp. Not because I don't like it, but because I like to avoid the weird half-awake conversations with other campers who linger too long around their gear. There's something about being the first one out that feels safe, predictable, normal. That morning, I woke before sunrise, the air already crisp with the kind of cold that makes your breath puff in front of your face. Birds were stirring, leaves were damp from overnight dew, and the faint smell of coffee from a neighboring site drifted in the wind. I felt that familiar excitement of packing and hitting the road before anyone else stirred, and I moved quickly, almost mechanically, folding tents and stuffing sleeping bags into their bags, zippers snapping like small victory sounds. I had my routine down to a science. Everything packed in a specific order, weighted properly in the trunk, fragile stuff wrapped carefully. My car was a tiny SUV, but I knew every inch of it like the back of my hand. I pulled out the camping stove, pots and pans, my backpack with clothes and toiletries, and my cooler full of leftovers I wasn't eating. Everything had a place. I was meticulous. I finished packing the last bag, zipped the tent bag shut, and went to the trunk to load it in. That's when I froze. The trunk was closed. Locked. I didn't remember locking it. And the worst part, everything was already in there. My gear. Packed exactly the way I do it. Sleeping bag rolled the same way. Cooler tucked to the left. Backpack upright against the wall. The way I had packed it would have taken at least 10 minutes. Maybe more, carefully folding, checking for space, moving stuff around to fit. But I hadn't touched it yet. My stomach sank. I circled the car slowly, checking doors. Nothing was open. Nothing was unlocked. The driver's side door clicked like it always does, but when I got inside, the interior looked exactly how I leave it when I pack. Seats pushed back just a little. The dashboard cleared of clutter, steering wheel at the same angle. I sat down slowly, thinking I was hallucinating. Then I saw it. A note on the passenger seat. White, folded neatly. My handwriting. Same pen pressure. Same scrawl. I picked it up with trembling hands. It said, staying was easier. No explanation. No name. Just that sentence. I sat there for what felt like forever, trying to process it. My brain spun in circles. Maybe someone had been at the campsite earlier than me. Maybe a maintenance worker, maybe another camper, but none of that made sense. How could they know my exact packing method? How could they replicate it perfectly? I thought about the previous night. I had heard the faint sound of movement around my tent, footsteps I couldn't place. I told myself it was probably animals or the wind. Now I wasn't sure anymore. I reached for the keys in my pocket. The ignition was off. I inserted the key. Nothing happened. I pressed the button to start. Engine roared normally. I exhaled, trying to calm down. My hands were shaking. I decided to drive anyway, to put distance between myself and whatever had done this. I pulled out of the campsite slowly, scanning every curve in the road. The sun was just peeking over the trees, light spreading across the gravel paths. Everything seemed normal outside, peaceful, almost too peaceful. I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone running after me, carrying a bag of my belongings. Nothing. As I drove, I kept thinking about the note. Staying was easier. Easier for whom? For them. For me? It didn't feel like a friendly message. Not really. It felt like an observation. A warning. Maybe both. I stopped at a rest area a few miles down the road, trying to think logically. I popped the trunk open. Everything was still there. Perfectly packed. I checked under the mats, the footwells, even behind the seats. Nothing else. Nothing unusual. Just my stuff. As if the morning had been a rehearsal, a simulation, and I was walking into it blind. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The thought gnawed at me, constant and dull, like a low hum vibrating in my bones. My phone buzzed. I jumped. I pulled it out. No messages. No missed calls. The screen lit up with nothing but the home screen, app icons blinking lazily. I shut it off again. Better to focus on driving on distance. The road stretched out in front of me, lined with trees that filtered the morning light into streaks. I thought about calling someone, anyone, but the words felt useless. How could I explain that my car had been packed by someone else while I slept, or while I was just outside, moving my own things around? How could I explain the note in my handwriting that hadn't existed when I packed the day before? The more I thought about it, the more I realized I had been watching myself all along. Or maybe something had been watching me for a long time. Every little habit, every way I packed, every subtle choice I make when camping, it wasn't private. Not anymore. By mid-morning, I had put at least 20 miles between the campsite and myself. I pulled over again, this time at a small overlook with a view of valley blanketed in mist. I sat in the car, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to steady my breathing. The gear was still there. Perfect. The note still on the seat, folded like a silent threat or a promise. I got out, stretched, and tried to act normal. Breathe, walk around, nothing strange. But the woods surrounding the overlook felt too still, too quiet. Every shadow seemed to move just slightly when I blinked. Every rustle of leaves felt deliberate. I realized I hadn't seen another camper since leaving. Not one. No joggers, no cars passing, nothing. Just me and the empty road. That should have felt peaceful. Instead, it felt deliberate, like the world had been cleared for me, or by me. I couldn't tell anymore. By noon, I was on a highway, traffic sparse but steady. My brain tried to insist this was normal. Maybe it was just coincidence. Maybe someone had access to my campsite and my car. Maybe they were playing a prank. Rational explanations seemed flimsy, but they were all I had. I stopped at a diner, parked, walked inside, tried to order food like nothing was wrong. The waitress smiled, casual and normal. I ate in silence, scanning the parking lot, the street, the trees beyond. Nothing unusual. Nothing overtly threatening. Everything fine. Everything normal. Back in the car, I checked my phone again. Still nothing. I considered deleting the note, burning it even, but my hands didn't move. I needed it there, a proof that what happened was real. Otherwise, I feared my mind would play tricks on me later, convincing me I had imagined it all. The drive home was long. I kept glancing at the seat next to me, expecting the note to move, expecting the gear to shift. Nothing happened. The sun climbed higher, the shadows shortened, and I told myself the world had returned to normal. I parked in my driveway finally, shut the engine off, and sat there a while. I looked at the trunk, fully closed, the gear still perfectly packed. I didn't touch it. I didn't open it. I waited. Hours later, I finally brought the gear inside. Everything looked exactly as it had. Nothing missing. nothing out of place. I put the note in a drawer, folded neatly like it belonged there, though I knew it didn't. I didn't sleep well that night. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind against the window, felt like it was echoing the quiet footsteps from the campsite. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined someone watching me pack, following the exact order, learning every detail. I haven't returned to that campsite since. I haven't packed my car early like I used to. I don't leave things unattended, even briefly, when I camp. Sometimes when I'm unloading groceries or putting laundry away, I look at the way my hands work, the way I fold, the way I stack, and I wonder if someone else out there knows these habits as well as I do. I wonder if that morning was just a rehearsal. I never found out who packed the car, or why the note was there, or if the original campsite ever had me in it, or someone pretending to be me. I just know that morning changed the way I see routines, the way I see control, the way I see myself.